You're listening to Alternative Future Radio, home of the weird, resting place of the paranormal. Will take you to the furthest reaches of the galaxy and beyond. Strange phenomena, aliens, psychics, cryptozoology, conspiracy, holistic health, and UFOs. Alternative Future Radio, where spooky just got weird.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Out There Hour with Basil and Mark. It's just fantastic to be here, for you mostly.
The Out There Hour on Alternative Future Radio. The Out There Hour with Basil and Mark. www.alternativefutureradio.com.
Yay! Yay! Yay indeed.
Nearly forgot.
Lots of yays. Everybody yay. That bloke sounded slightly sort of Canadian, didn't he? That voiceover guy.
You reckon?
Yeah. I'm just doing a link, seriously.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, he did sound a bit Canadian. And
He did.
Which is fortunate, because we'll be all the way to Canada
We will,
today
yes,
to speak to our special guest.
Welcome to the show, everybody. That's how we usually start.
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. Europe, Africa, and the Middle East.
Yeah. Excellent.
And Canada. We're speaking to our special guest, Kevin Annett, on something called the Canadian Holocaust.
Yeah, his website is hiddenfromhistory.org. It's all very interesting stuff.
Now, we're all very well aware in Europe of the child abuse by the Catholic Church.
Yes, they perpetrated quite a bit.
They haven't been taken to book on it satisfactorily, I don't think.
Has anybody done any hard time?
No, Mark, no, nobody's done any hard time. And repatriations?
Barely.
Joke.
Barely. Shall we bring him in?
Have we explained who he is and what he is?
Kevin Annett, hiddenfromhistory.org.
Yeah.
He is an activist, campaigner.
He's a campaigner for children's rights and adults who have been victims of abuse by, I think, the Catholic Church or any church.
Yeah.
Industrial schools.
Mm-hmm. You had some questions you wanted to ask him about other types of institutions as well, so we'll have to bring that up.
Remind me when he comes on.
I will, because you'll have forgotten. I will. Okay, so hopefully on the line we should have Mr. Kevin Annett. Do we have you there, Kevin? I hope so.
I'm here. Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, Kevin.
The line's not brilliant today, but we'll do what we can.
Okay.
You're a long way away in Canada there, Kevin, so...
And thank you for getting up so early for us.
Well, that's right, yeah.
Thanks ever so much. So, hiddenfromhistory.org, I suppose the first thing really is, can you tell us about that, Kevin, and who you represent and what you do?
Well, it's been a campaign for almost 20 years now. It started when I was a clergyman on the West Coast, discovering the enormous death rate in the Indian boarding schools run by both the Catholic and the Protestant churches. Mm-hmm. And I've been campaigning for many years with the survivors to get some kind of reparations and acknowledgement that these were acts of genocide. This wasn't simply children being raped by their random priest. It was a whole policy of extermination, using the churches to force natives off their land, well, really to do many of the things that the English did in Ireland, dislocation and destruction of the culture. So over the years, that's really blossomed into a much bigger movement, and we're working now with groups, including in Ireland, to hold the Vatican and the various governments responsible for these crimes that really happen all over the world. And as a matter of fact, in Ireland, the best example of that is the Magdalene laundries.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, we've been working with survivors of those facilities too. We had a very similar series of crimes, an enormous death rate, mass graves that are all over the country. So, it's the same kind of crime.
Yeah. Kevin, it's probably worthwhile explaining to people who are beyond these realms what these institutions were. I mean, I know a little bit about the Magdalene laundries, if I can say it right. What were they actually doing to these children?
Well, in the case of the Magdalene laundries, it was set up back in the 1800s, not just in Ireland, but in 34 other countries, To give you an example of Ireland, there was a law that if a young girl became pregnant and she wasn't married, she would lose the baby. She'd never see the child. It would be taken from her at the moment of birth. And then she would be incarcerated in these laundries, in many cases for her entire life. And she would be forced to work there. It was an unpaid sweatshop. And they were fed very little. A lot of them died because of disease and hunger, beatings and that kind of thing. If they tried running away, the guardian would pick them up and bring them back. So there was a lot of collusion by the police and the government in keeping these facilities going. The last Magdalen and Laundry in Ireland didn't close till 1996.
Yeah.
Wow.
Many of these perpetrators are still alive. And unfortunately, you probably know about the Ryan report and all that that came out over the last few years. But unfortunately, the Magdalen survivors were not included in any settlement. The government ruled they couldn't, sue the church. So, like in Canada, it was a case of the government colluding with the church to protect what they did and to basically make sure that they weren't held liable for a lot of these crimes.
In Canada, was it Native American children you're talking about there?
In the case of the Indian boarding schools, yes, they were both Native and mixed blood, who we call the Métis people. And under a law brought in 1920, every Native child had to be incarcerated in these places or the parents would go to jail.
Oh.
Our figures show that over half these children died in the facility. The 50% death rate was common all over the country for many decades. So
was that their intention? Why were so many of them dying? Did they want them to die?
Well, yeah, these were set up, the schools were set up right at the time, especially in Western Canada, where they were trying to get a lot of the Indians off the land. They wanted the resources. And it was a way to basically depopulate Western Canada, especially.
Yeah. I mean, they sound more like Dachau than a place you would want to go.
Very much. If people go to a lot of my research is posted online. It's called hiddennolonger.com. And you can see in there these statistics, government documents from their own officials describing how children were deliberately taken who were healthy and put in the same dorms as children who were dying of tuberculosis and then never treated.
Good grief.
Deliberately as a policy over many years. So, it's one of the reasons the death rate is so high.
I'm actually a Catholic, Kevin, but I think, did I read somewhere you started out as a Protestant priest?
That's right. It was the United Church of Canada, the largest Protestant church in Canada.
And I understand that.
But I was thrown out of that church. I was expelled from that church when I began to surface a lot of this stuff.
So they didn't like it either. They were also involved then, the Protestant church?
Very much. I mean, a lot of the churches were run by the Catholics, but the Protestants and the Church of England were very heavily involved as well. So this was right across the board,
So we're speaking a lot about the church, but in the UK, you're probably familiar with the Holly Gregg case, which would actually foster homes, social services, the judicial system. Do you have any? Has there been a lot of exposure of social services there in Canada in the same?
As a matter of fact,
yeah, go on.
Yeah, I work with the Holly Gregg campaign actually, and what's significant about that is how it implicates elements of people in the police, the judicial system, social services. We found a similar system operating in Canada, where children are taken from their homes, under often very false pretexts.
A dirty plate or a dirty cup.
Right, exactly, and they're trafficked. It's a system of modern child trafficking, and often the children are put in homes of known child rapists, people with a whole documented history of that. And so it's definitely collusion within the social service system itself. You find this in many countries, so we're talking about really an international system of child trafficking that involves more than the churches, definitely.
Yeah, because it would be fair to say now that the church has been fairly, it's well exposed. Would you agree? I mean,
some of it has been exposed, but exposure is one thing, and being held accountable is another. In Ireland, like in Canada, the government brought in laws to basically indemnify the church legally so that they could never be held responsible for what they did. So, for example, in Canada, not one person has ever gone to trial for the death of a child in these schools, even though over 50,000 children died. So a similar system in Ireland, there hasn't been, the only place where a member of the church hierarchy has ever faced trial is in the United States. This last month, there's 2 bishops who are facing trial for helping cover up the rape of children. But that's never happened in any other country yet.
Wow.
But if they have indemnity, what can ever be done about them? How will they ever be brought to justice? Or priests who, what often happened here in Ireland, the bishop will get to know about a priest who was, had complaints made about him.
Yeah.
And what would happen with them? They'd be moved to a different parish in a different county.
Yeah, yeah.
So you've got 2 people guilty there. You've got the abuser plus the bishop who moved the priest around. But are you saying then that nothing's ever going to be done about them, Kevin?
Well, no, on the contrary, it would be very easy for the governments to take action against these known child raping priests. They simply have to bring the church under the law of the land and say the church is not a law unto itself. Canon law does not supersede, laws that protect children in any country. As a matter of fact, in Ireland, the TSOC last year did in the Doro get up and say that the Vatican is not a law unto itself. It cannot interfere with the laws of Ireland. And in fact, there's a law, now I'm not sure whether it's passed yet in Ireland, but it provides for priests to be prosecuted and go to jail for 5 years if they don't report the rape of a child. And that's an encouraging step.
Kevin, I've got a question. Was this ring, if we can call it a ring of people, was this ring purely motivated by the joy of abuse, or was there money involved? What was the motivation?
Oh, do you mean in the case of Canada, or
we'll start with Canada and work out from there.
In the case of the Indian boarding schools, it was a real financial, kind of an economic incentive. For one thing, like with institutes everywhere, the churches were given a lot of money for every child that they incarcerated. They also deliberately built these Indian boarding schools on very valuable land and resources. And in the case of, one of the reasons I was fired from the United Church was I discovered that the early missionaries had grabbed a lot of land from the native people and had then sold it to logging companies, mining companies, all over the place. The churches made a lot of money out of their missionary activities. So this was the case as well. So the Vatican is sitting on a lot of valuable land all over the world because of that. And one of the reasons, or the things that the native people have been demanding, is that the churches simply return that land and and compensate them for all of the lost wealth that was taken from them. So I would say it wasn't simply the whole missionary attitude that we know better, we have to conquer these savages for their own good. It was also that it was very profitable for the church to do that.
But the Vatican, we're talking about things being a law unto themselves. I think the Vatican is a law unto itself. It's a bit like the City of London. They have they're
a funny entity, aren't they?
Yeah, they're a separate entity to everything else. The City of London and the Vatican.
That's right. They are. Well, the thing is, there's a good book people should read called The Case of the Pope. It's written by Jeffrey Robinson. He's a London-based lawyer, and he says the whole notion that the Vatican is a state is he calls it a Santa Claus state. That it's this fiction that governments operate according to. But it has no basis in international law. It was created as a state by a now deposed dictator, Benito Mussolini, in 1929.
Yeah.
It was never recognized as a state under any international law. And it just has standing at the United Nations because of a backroom deal it made with the General Secretary in the 1960s. So, it doesn't actually have any reality as a state. And even if that was the case, any head of state can be prosecuted for crimes against humanity. So the Pope has no basis to claim he's not liable for these letters he signed ordering cover-up of rape in various churches. Joseph Ratzinger is personally implicated in obstructing justice in many countries. So he can be prosecuted. The question is, politically, is it going to be a thing that government are going to do, risking the disfavor of Catholic voters. I mean, that's always the issue, but it's not that it's impossible, it's just the government so far haven't had the backbone to do it.
So it's a sort of red tape.
Well, yeah, partly, yeah.
Partly red tape.
And incidentally, do you know where red tape comes from? I looked this up. We talked about this before. I actually thought that red tape was something to do with communism or something because they're into the bureaucracy. It's actually from Catholicism. It was the red tape that used to bind the papers, I believe.
Oh, I see.
I see. Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
And Ratzinger, speaking of Ratzinger, myself and Mark have been having a debate here. Am I right? He was a Hitler Youth?
Yes. He was. Now, he claims he wasn't in a combat unit, he was in an artillery unit, which is not accurate because the Hitler Youth were active frontline military. They fought at D-Day, they used to shoot prisoners all the time, they had a very bad reputation. So he was definitely Hitler Youth, and he did his best to kind of downplay that when that came out, but it's good.
Yeah, you would imagine. That doesn't really sound like somebody that you would want to be heading anything, to be honest.
No.
Could you clarify something for us, Kevin? The Jesuits, and what role do they play in the Catholic Church? I'm not quite sure what the Jesuits are, but I've heard you mention them.
Well, one of the reasons it's hard to know is they're a secret society. They have their own secret oath of loyalty to the Pope, personally. And you can find that on a Google search. The oath of the Jesuit oath actually has a statement in it. I don't have the direct one from me, but it basically says that any ruler who is not a Catholic does not have the right to live. And that was kind of the justification for what they did from the Ignatius Loyola, who set them up in the 1600s. It was a military society, and their whole role was to counter the Reformation and free thinking and secularism all over the world. But they applied to native people the same standard that they did to so-called heretics, in that not being Catholic, they were you could do whatever you wanted to, including exterminate them. And that's one of the reasons the Jesuits were the ones who set up a lot of these Indian boarding schools all over the world. Their whole strategy was to convert a local chieftain to Catholicism and then wipe out the others who weren't Catholics, using the native Catholic chief to do that. That happened all over the world, in Canada as well as Ireland. So yeah, they've got a very long and murderous history. And they also, today, they have a lot of control in the Vatican. They are one of the arms behind the control of the Vatican Bank. So the Jesuits actually own a lot of, they have over, we figure tens of billions of dollars invested in the American economy, in the banks, in the arms industry. You know, the Vatican Bank is really at the heart of a lot of these crimes, and the Jesuits are right in there with it.
Oh, well, you mentioned in a previous interview something about John Paul I, I think. I think he was exposing something about the Vatican Bank. It was you, I think, I heard mention.
That's right. There's a very good book written about it by David Yallop, who's an investigative journalist. The book is called In God's Name, and it documents very thoroughly how John Paul I was poisoned. He was murdered for a month in office in September 1978. And all of those who knew him were dead within a couple of years. They never did an autopsy. Basically, what he was doing was he ordered an investigation into the Vatican Bank. He found out that the bank was laundering a lot of money for the mafia and for right-wing dictatorships all over the world. And he was doing a serious cleanup, and that stopped very quickly. The man who came in after him, John Paul II,
yes,
canceled the investigation of the Vatican Bank. He used the Vatican Bank to fund the political movement in Poland, the Solidarity movement, along with CIA support. So, I think that's one of the reasons they're considering beatifying that Pope, because he did the job so well for the Vatican Bank and the criminal elements around it.
What was the Solidarity movement in Poland, Kevin?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. You broke up there.
No problem. Yeah, I just want. What was the Solidarity movement in Poland? What was that exactly?
Well, it was a labor movement. It was really the first independent trade union movement that was developing a real political opposition to the regime in Poland under so-called communism. And they then became, unfortunately, they began to receive a lot of money from the West, from not only from the bank, but it was a heavily funded CIA operation by the end, for obvious reasons. But no, yeah, Lech Walesa, who headed it, was a very loyal Catholic. He used to actually meet with the Archbishop in Warsaw, and it was so. I mean, there were a lot of ties to the Vatican to that movement, even though there was. It's like anything, it was many things at once, but it definitely had Vatican money behind it for sure.
Kevin, you've said, as you said earlier, you are no longer part of the church there. Are you still practicing in any church, or are you full-time campaigning now?
No, I'm not with the church. I operate with different Native communities. I've been adopted into 3 different Native nations, and I'm working full-time on this campaign. It's really a full-time job, because as the more we look into these crimes, the deeper it goes, and the more it's obvious that these crimes are ongoing. I'm working, for example, in Vancouver with a group documenting child trafficking networks all over the Pacific. And so human trafficking is like drugs or the arms trade. It's very lucrative. It involves governments. And unfortunately, in this case, churches as well.
So it's still going on to this day?
Very much. There's in British Columbia here on the West Coast, there's over 500 missing Aboriginal women. This is very common for Native people to be under attack. The death rate among Native people in Canada is as high as it ever was 100 years ago. And, these crimes are continuing.
Kevin,
the death of Aboriginal people in police custody, that kind of thing is ongoing.
Kevin, I've got a question for you. You said that the church there has been given indemnity from prosecution, but you say that this is still going on. So are they indemnified against acts they're currently committing and will commit? Because that sounds insane.
Well, yeah, I mean, in practice they are. I'll give you an example. There was, in the United Church here, there was a minister, Russell Crosley, who was a serial rapist. And this is not against Native, these are against middle-class white women in his congregation. For 30 years, he was moved around by the United Church to various congregations. In the 1990s, right here on Vancouver Island, he was finally brought to trial. He served only 6 months. And after, all the time he was in jail, he was kept on salary. After he was let out of prison, he was given a testimonial dinner by his church, and he was retired on full pension. He was never defrauded. Whereas at the very same time, I was thrown out of the church for exposing these crimes. So the serial rapist is on salary in retirement, and the whistleblower is defrauded and officially denigrated. That shows you how these churches operate. You can get away with these crimes if you're a clergy and never be held accountable. It isn't just in the Catholic Church. This is a common way of operating. The churches are still very much a law unto themselves.
Wow. I mean, that is crazy. I mean, I can't get over the fact that these people have been given an immunity from prosecution for crimes they're still committing. I mean, you could imagine in certain circumstances some people might try and get it for past crimes from years ago. But right. to get immunity from prosecution for something that's still going on is just insane.
So what kind of campaigns are you running, and how can people get involved with them at the moment, Kevin?
Well, the main campaign is called the International Tribunal of the Crimes of Church and State. Our website is itccs.org, and we have branches in 5 countries, including in Ireland. On May 4th, some of our members had a meeting and a rally in Dublin with the anti-Catholic Church activists worldwide. These were groups that are campaigning to have, well, for one thing, Cardinal Sean Brady stepped down because the head of the Catholic Church in Ireland has been exposed as having protected child rapists while in office. But the International Tribunal is holding events around the world, and in September, we're reconvening a tribunal in London, and we're going to be holding events around Ireland as well. Basically what it is an attempt to bring these people to a public tribunal, to expose the crimes, to work with survivors, and to basically make changes so that, for example, one of the things we want is for governments to bring in laws licensing clergy as public servants so that when they harm a child, they can lose their license. We want to bring the church under public ownership, in effect, so that they can be monitored and controlled by the communities and not be a law to themselves. You know, we think the church should be paying for all of the damage they've done to medical bills, counseling for all of their victims, returning the remains of the children who died. We know there's graves all over Ireland. Children who died, they should be given a proper burial and recognition. So these are some of the issues we're campaigning on. And if people want to contact me, it's Hidden From History 1, like the number 1, Hidden From History 1 at gmail.com.
Yep.
And again, the websites are itccs.org and hiddennolonger.com. I plan to be in Ireland in the fall, and you know, can definitely meet with people, and we'll be holding events around the country. So please, I encourage people to contact me.
Yeah.
And I can connect with the groups in Ireland that are working on this stuff.
Is there a list of dates that we can go and see, or when you'll be running these events in Ireland?
We can add them to our events calendar if needs be.
It'll be in September and October. We're still putting the dates together, but I will post that on itccs.org.
Okay.
And I'll definitely send you guys the dates and the locations so people can
do that.
Be, informed well in advance.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of repatriations, if it was down to me as a member of the Catholic Church, I mean, personally, what I'd like to do is is sell all of the chalices and the crosses and the paintings and even the church, and just give the money to the victims. But you know,
that's part with some of their Nazi gold, for example.
That would be my personal thing that I would like to do. But of course, you know, the Vatican is a different story altogether.
Well, I think.
Does he cut out?
Yeah, I think Jesus. I know Jesus would agree with you because he tried doing the same thing. So did Pope John Paul I.
Exactly.
But there are many people in the Catholic Church who agree with you. You know, and in fact, often when we hold vigils outside churches, and even when we go in during masses and talk to people, many of them are in agreement that it's the clergy who are ordered. As a matter of fact, Catholics who are listening should know that there's actually a policy in the Vatican. It's called Crimen Solicitanis. It's part of canon law. And it orders, it was brought in 1929 and reaffirmed in the 1980s. And it orders every priest and bishop anywhere in the world to suppress evidence of child rape when it happens in their parish. So if your child is harmed by a priest, the other priests are obligated to silence the victim and to never tell the police. So, you know, they're telling clergy everywhere to be involved in a criminal conspiracy to protect child rapists. That's policy. As long as that policy is in place, it's just the church is not being genuine when they're saying they want to help victims, you know, because they're telling clergy they have to help protect the rapists, and that's unconscionable.
We've been debating for a couple of weeks now between Basil and I. Basil's a Catholic and I'm a devout atheist. We've been debating for quite some time now that I keep saying to him, the Catholic Church, in particular, not to pick on them too much, but we're talking about them, they've probably done, from my point of view at least anyway, more bad than good. And I keep asking Basil whether or not he thinks he's on the right side. And what you're saying there is kind of giving me more and more evidence for my theory, which is weird considering where it's coming from. But what are your thoughts on this? This organization seems to be setting out to do evil, and it has policies of evil. Am I interpreting that wrong?
No, I don't believe you are. I often say to people, it doesn't really matter what you call yourself; it's what you do every day.
Yeah.
You know, I've got friends who are Catholic priests. One of whom he took his congregation and left. He's in Eastern Canada, and they're an independent Catholic denomination. They kept their faith, but they're just saying we're not going to give our money to Rome anymore. We don't acknowledge the Bishop of Rome.
Yeah.
And you can have all sorts of diversity within your faith. You don't have to hold allegiance to this corporation, and that's what.
Yeah, where I came from, they have a motto of.
It's the oldest corporation on the planet.
Sorry, I didn't. I thought you'd stop there. You were breaking up.
No, he's just mentioning about the Vatican. It's my opinion as well. I'm not a follower of the Vatican or the Pope, and I do think I see the Vatican as a corporation.
Oh, completely.
What do you think? What think about that, Kevin?
It is a corporation. It's the oldest one in history, and it's one of the wealthiest.
Yeah.
And its main goal is to protect its wealth and its position in the world, not to do right, not to follow the teachings of Christ. Who said, "Give away your wealth to the poor, not hoard it."
Well, I was sorry, I keep interrupting there. There's a little bit of a pause there. I was just saying, we have there's a saying where I come from, where there's a little motto that says, "Spectator agendo," judge us by our actions. And if you judge them by their actions, you can only really reach one conclusion.
Yeah, I agree. And now, just so we're not just dumping on the Catholic Church, I think it's true about any church that becomes a corporation, becomes legally authorized by the government to operate. Their allegiance is to that corporation, not to their own faith.
True.
And it's, a long tradition in Christianity to break off and just operate as congregations. That's all that people need to do. You don't need to be part of this big institution.
Yeah. I mean, we always say follow the money. And when you start to follow the money, the motivations always seem to come through. You were talking about Canada and how there was a financial motivation there. What about in other countries, like, say for example, in Ireland and other countries where there's, not to my mind, a clear financial motivation, but there just seems to be a more sexual motivation, for want of a better word. Is that the motivation, or is there something else at play?
No, there's definitely financial motivation still. In the case of the Catholic Church, there's things called financial concordats, and a concordat is a treaty between the Vatican and any government in the world. These financial concordats are secret agreements with over 100 governments to channel taxpayers' money right into the Vatican Bank. Last year alone, Spain gave 260 million euros to the Vatican Bank, just out of taxpayers' money. Yeah. So these concordats, you should ask your member of the Dora, is there a financial concordat between the Irish government and Rome? How much money is being siphoned into that bank every year?
Yeah.
Is that what voters want?
I thought that there was supposed to be, in most constitutional countries, and I think Ireland's one of them, there's supposed to be a separation of church and state. But funding them seems to be somewhat against that, I would have thought.
Yeah, in practice, there isn't a separation of church and state when you look at things like that. There's the theory, and then there's what happens every day, and the government should be held accountable in Ireland, saying if you do want to bring in changes to bring the church under the same law as everybody else, then put a referendum. If there's this financial concordat, then have voters say they want their money funding the Church of Rome.
Are you having any personal experience there in Canada with, I don't know what you'd call them in Canada, but in the UK we've got a man called Brian Gerrish, and he talks about child stealing from the state. That would be the social services. I think it's CPS there in Canada. Well, it is in America.
In America, I don't know what the Canadians
are you having many parents or mothers coming to you saying that they've felt they've had their children taken into care unfairly, or is that something you deal with?
No, I deal with that all the time. I get those. As a matter of fact, more and more as this story gets out, I'm getting calls and emails all the time from that happening, not just to Native mothers, but many others. There's a movement that started showing how a lot of these orphanages and foster homes are child trafficking, baby trafficking systems. There's a law in Canada called the BFA protocol, Baby for Adoption, and you probably have it in Ireland. And right in the hospital, if a mother is considered that she's not going to be fit to be a mother, she has to sign away her baby while it's still in the womb. And these orphanages and foster care homes take the baby at birth and sell it off very profitably to parents looking for babies. The churches, the Salvation Army, and the Catholic Church are very involved in operating these homes today. So yeah, it's child trafficking, it's baby trafficking, and it happens legally, and it's still going on today.
Yeah, but it's also it's state-run social services and state-run care homes as well. And there's as I was trying to say to you earlier, there is most people would admit there's something wrong with the church now. They wouldn't trust their children in a church in a church foster home. Yeah. The problem is it's very hard to get through to the general public. about the state-run social services. There's a mental block there. People do not believe that social workers could be bad.
Well, that's true, and an example of that is we documented here in British Columbia how right in the Child and Family Services system there was a child trafficking network, a pedophile ring, where social services judges, and they even named the judges, they were identified by eyewitnesses, judges in the Supreme Court, 2 of them, and police officers in that who were involved in these I don't like to call them pedophile rings, because pedophilia in Greek means friend of children. Okay. And that's really not right. They're child rapists. And they operate under the government system, definitely. So the best way to find this out is to get is to name it publicly and to say that anybody who knows about their operation of these things should come out publicly and start naming names.
Well, I mean, I personally, having lived in London most of my life, I've personally met people who have been abused in care homes, and and more than one, maybe 2 or 3. What about you, Mark?
In Ireland, not in England, but since I moved here, you can't throw a stick without hitting somebody who's been abused.
Yeah, but by the church.
Oh yeah,
I'm talking.
Care homes as well.
You see, there's a hard nut to crack here when it comes to social services. It's a very hard thing to get across to people that they mightn't be quite as good. People think if there's a family in trouble, if they ring social services, everything's going to be sorted out and everything's going to be fine and the child's going to be safe. But it's not always the case. Yeah, and I think this is one of the biggest problems.
The homes, especially that kind of establishment. Kevin, are you still there? We've still got you there.
I'm just listening, yeah.
Yeah, we were just talking about the homes. I mean, the actual care homes. Have you had many experiences with those? The rather than individual homes, which I imagine are probably a mixed bag, but more like the actual care homes themselves.
Well, it's like anything. It's hard to find this at first because for every person working in the system, for every honest person, there's somebody involved in these other things. And like with the police, they feel there's like a need to protect one another. Yeah. Because psychologically, if you're in a system of abuse and crime, you will tend to not talk about it because you're afraid that you might be implicated. So it's a whole culture of silence. It isn't just the church that operates that way. It's all of these self-governing bodies like judges, police, military. They're all self-governing and self-examining, so it's hard for the public to learn what's really going on.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard for them to believe. But we spoke about the Holly Gregg case and the legal representation. It was Robert Green. Now, Robert Green was in prison for 9 months, and I think the last I've heard, and I hope I'm wrong about this, but I think Holly Gregg has been put into care since. Has she, Kevin?
I'm not sure about that. I do know that Robert is now freed. He got out of prison. I just got an email from him the other day. I'm not sure about Holly's state. I haven't seen them in a couple of years. But I know that her case is known all over the world now.
Well, the last I heard of Holly and her mother, her mother's name slips my mind at the moment, that they had an appearance in court, I think it was 3 or 4 months ago, and Shropshire Social Services had deemed that the mother wasn't fit to take care of Holly because of all of the publicity she was bringing on her.
That's the way you do take care of your kids, by making these crimes public.
Yeah, and so it seemed to me that they took Robert Green out of the picture, and a few weeks later they were going to separate the mother and the daughter.
Well, that's really, really serious. Thanks for telling me that. I'll call them and find out.
Yeah, we were having a big campaign about it.
In London, England, on September 29th, in Trafalgar Square, they're having a big rally for her, their annual child abuse rally. So yeah, that's something I hope to be at. And if you know people, these are the kinds of things that we need to do all over England and Ireland to expose, like you say, what's going on now.
And Kevin, can you get into England? Oh, yeah. You were turned away.
That's the question. Yeah.
Can you get there?
Well, I'm sure going to try again. We have a member of Parliament who, when I come into the country, he plans to be there at the airport and we're going to have observers there, and they're going to ask the UK border agency exactly why are you keeping this Commonwealth citizen out of the country.
Yeah.
Last May 29th, I was kept out with no reason given at Stansted Airport when I was trying to get back into the country. They said the only reason the man gave was, and this could have just been a particularly nasty bodyguard, but it seemed strange because he looked on his computer screen when my name came up and he kind of did a double take. And then he created a flimsy excuse saying, well, it's unusual for a tourist to be giving public lectures. And that was the only reason they gave for keeping me out of the country, that I was giving a public lecture. So, I don't know, it was pretty flimsy. But if they try it again, we're certainly going to have it monitored and broadcast all over YouTube. And you know, I don't think they'll be that stupid, actually, because I've got exposure all over the world.
Were you put on a no-fly list, do you think, or will you be?
No, I haven't been on a no-fly list. There hasn't been any other repercussion. They kept me in an immigration prison for 12 hours.
Oh, God.
But no, you know, it's just... it's either just something silly, or if it's definitely a campaign to keep me out, we'll find out when I trust them back.
As we've said before, if you get things like that happening to you, you know you're doing something right.
Right.
You know you've really annoyed somebody.
Yeah.
Well, the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church, they're quite similar in little communities or towns or whatever. What would you do to change a church? I mean, if you, what would you see as the way forward for all our churches?
Well, like I say, I think the power lies in the congregations. You should the congregations to exert ultimate control over their church. I would get rid of the hierarchy in any church, whether it's a bishop model, whether it's a bureaucratic model of full-time officials, like in the United Church, who have ultimate control. Just return power to the congregation.
Why would you need a hierarchy? What's the point? What's the point in having somebody above a priest?
Yeah.
What does he do? You don't go to him.
Well, they need, the bigger you are as a corporation, the more bureaucracy you need, and it's basically to service the institution, not the people.
Talking about corporations, you were saying earlier about your desire to see them listed as maybe a company status. I wanted to ask you, if they're running these homes where they're selling children, basically, for all intents and purposes, how are they getting away with this in legal and tax terms? Because they're basically trafficking children. Are they paying tax on this? Are they companies? You know, it seems like something that if I tried to do, I'd find very hard to get away with.
Well, once the evidence, you see, in most societies, evidence isn't valid unless it's been through a court, and it's on the public record somewhere. A newspaper article or somebody just documented on their own doesn't seem to have a lot of weight. So, but the problem with getting this into the court system, in Canada at least, is it's all under the jurisdiction of the so-called Crown. And we've tried to get these crimes into the courts, and time and again judges say the same thing. They have no power to rule against the Crown as a criminal actor because they're appointed by the Crown. So that's one of the reasons there's a movement in Canada to sever ties with the Crown. About 58% of Canadians want a republic, and do what you guys did, and the Americans and in India and all over the world, sever ties with the Crown of England, because that's the only way we're going to be able to put the Crown on trial for these crimes against humanity. And so that's, you know, more and more we're seeing this as a political movement. You have to not rely on the institutions that did the crimes. You've got to set up your own courts and means of trying these people, just, you know, to protect the future generation.
And how's that going to be achieved? By lobbying, or?
Well, through what we're hoping to do is put forward the call to have a public referendum and at the next election, and that would mean having a declaration of independence, where you sever the ties with the Governor General and the Crown of England.
Yes. And
you have a republic. I mean, you guys did it.
So it's a sort of it's a sovereignty movement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's tied in Canada very much with the Aboriginal sovereignty movement, where a lot of Native nations don't recognize the Crown to start off with.
Well, Kevin.
Territory. Yeah, those are often the people I work with.
Kevin, I'll clear up something. When you talk about sovereignty in the Republic of Ireland, or the Republic of Ireland, we're very much under the yoke of the European Union. They make 70% of our laws here.
New boss, same as old boss.
Yeah, we've got a new boss.
Well, I guess you'll have to do what you did in 1916 again.
I hope it won't be that violent. How would you describe your spiritual outlook now, Kevin? What do you subscribe to now? What do you believe in?
Well, I believe in humanity. I'm very much a humanist. I'm always been a believer, a strong, passionate believer in the teachings of Christ, but not the church, not organized religion. I've spoken at a lot of humanists. As a matter of fact, I spoke at the Humanist Conference in Carlingford in Ireland a couple of years ago. And I'm really looking for the common ground now that unites people as human beings. You know, we can have our different faiths and beliefs, but there is a common ground we all share, and that's really what I'm trying to build on. I'm also looking into my own traditions. My great grandfather came from Ireland, and I've always been drawn to kind of the Druid Christian tradition in Ireland before the Normans conquered, tried to conquer our people. Yeah. So for me, it's kind of a work in progress, but I'm looking for the common ground that I think people need to be united around the defense of our liberties, our children, and our earth. And whatever you want to call me, you know, that.
Well, it's much like myself. I mean, my religion is a journey. I still can't quite define it, but as you say, I think if you stick to Jesus Christ, follow what Jesus did, and ignore the corporation.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'd like to see. Personally, I'd like to go to a church where you could sit down and eat, have a cup of tea, have a discussion about social and political issues. I mean, that and
the Church of Barnes and Noble, basically,
and pray and do some praying. I think it needs a complete shake-up. All churches.
Yeah, you would have loved my parish in Port Alberni. That's what I used to do all the time. I would open the pulpit. And that's how I began to learn about these crimes in the Indian residential schools, because Native people began to talk about them from my pulpit.
Yeah, there must be a huge amount of victims. You know, just the sheer numbers of people standing up and saying, say in Canada and especially in Ireland, I was abused in the church. I mean, there must be. I mean, is there a number on that, Kevin?
We know that there was at least 250,000 children who went through these so-called schools, and half of them never came back. So we're talking over 100,000 died over a century. There was a law that you had to be incarcerated. They were doing things like they had sterilization laws, where if you continued to speak your language, you'd be sterilized. Medical experimentation, slave labor. It was everything you could think of. Nazi Germany went on in these places, and this is why we said it's a matter for international law, not just what's made it into the newspapers, which is the rape of children. These were acts of genocide, just like happened in your country and all over the world.
Yeah, but when I speak of numbers, I mean, how many people alive today are willing to,
come forward,
make a statement?
Yeah.
There's a lot of them, but the problem is that their own leaders, so-called leaders, have been getting a lot of government money and are discouraged from bringing these things out. There's only about, we figure, 30 or 40,000 survivors left.
Okay.
When we talk about this stuff, but their children suffer a lot of the effects. These are intergenerational trauma, and the effects are like a tidal wave. They keep going through each generation in the native world. So it's like you can say very much these crimes are continuing in the families of these survivors.
Well, 30 or 40,000 is a substantial amount of people to be saying the same thing.
Yeah.
There are probably relatives of the ones who are dead as well.
But no, with 30 or 40, I think he's saying that actually survived.
Right.
That's quite a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, that should hold some weight.
Yeah, I should mention, people, you can see some of these witnesses. We did a documentary film called Unrepentant, and it's up online. You can view it on our website, hiddennolonger.com.
Yep.
Where you can see a lot of this evidence too. But on there, people are describing, burying children in the ground, being part of the burial ritual. People still living today who did those things.
Well, I know of a care home in Jersey, a story that came up and seemed to get buried very, very quickly.
It did disappear, didn't it?
There was 7. They said the remains of 7 children, they thought, found on the grounds.
Yeah.
And there was quite a bit of news about
there was,
it. Quite a media storm, and then suddenly it died out and it just disappeared. What's going on there, Kevin?
Well, that's a tip of the iceberg. North America is one huge mass grave, in reality.
Right.
And we just started excavating at the oldest residential school in Brantford, Ontario, in the east part of Canada. It's set up by the Church of England in 1832. And again, thousands of children passed through there. Half of them never came back. At this gravesite, we've already found the bones that have been identified as belonging to children. We found buttons from clothing. We found lots of evidence of mass graves right at that one school. There's 28 other mass grave sites we documented all over Canada at these former schools. So yeah, there's an enormous number of these kids that are still lying there waiting to be brought home, for proper burial and recognition.
So they died in the schools, and they were buried in the schools.
Buried on the ground, sometimes under the floorboards, in the basements, in the sub-basements of these facilities.
But not in a marked grave.
Often incinerated in the school furnace. They would often burn up after they died. But definitely in the grounds in the early years, they simply bury them all over behind the schools.
So there was no record. Yeah.
Yeah. Often they would tell the parents that the kids died of tuberculosis, but then they would bury them, in secret. That was common.
Oh, and you have your own radio show, Kevin, I understand.
Yeah, it's a blog talk program. Every second Saturday, we're on again on the 26th of May.
Okay, give the link to that, and we'll put it on your page as well.
Thank you. It's blogtalkradio.com/hidden from history. It's 9 p.m. Ireland time on Saturday the 26th.
Yep.
And we just had last week Jerry O'Donovan and Dave O'Brien and some of the others who met with the Archbishop Martin in Dublin and presented a bunch of demands to him. They're going to be meeting again with Archbishop Martin on June 4th. So it's kind of an ongoing story in Ireland of this effort to get the Catholic Church to well, for one thing, they had survivors of the Magdalene laundries meeting with Martin and saying it's time for these children to be given a proper burial. We want you to identify these graves. And they're not letting go. They're going to meet again on June 4th and trying to get members of the public and the government to be there and the media to witness this. So that's a story that people should follow. Again, there's info on that on itccs.org.
And you have you have different guests every week, do you, or every couple of weeks?
Yeah, we have as well as the people who met with Archbishop Martin next week. We're going to have Peter Yellowclaw, who's a survivor of an Indian boarding school in Canada, and he's been trying to bring a lawsuit against Canada for genocide. So he's going to be talking as well.
Well, I think that's what you need, probably somebody making a personal civil case against the state, isn't it? That's going to help. And maybe the more of those, the better.
A class action or something like that.
A class action, yeah.
Yeah.
Are there many of those in the works at the moment? It's a hard thing for an individual to do, I guess.
It is hard, especially when they're blocked so effectively in the Canadian court system. We've been trying to go to the International Criminal Court for action on this. And in fact, I'm working with several lawyers who are trying to bring an action against the Pope, Joseph Ratzinger, in the International Criminal Court. And I think that's one of the routes that you have to go, international law rather than, in Canada, it's kind of a dead end in these crown-run
It's a catch-22 there. Yeah. Totally. But I think, I must say, for what you're saying, I think regarding the church, we have to, as a people, take control of the church back into our own hands and get out of this hierarchical system.
Well, one thing people are doing, that Catholic priest, a friend of mine, one of the things they started doing was on Sunday they said, we're not putting any money in the collection plate except for local expenses. Any other money, it doesn't go to the national or the international offices. We're just keeping it locally. That's the way it should be.
Kevin, I'm not really into the whole religion thing, but I frequent some people who are, and I see from my point of view anyway that it looks to me like the whole organized religion, whichever organized religion, at least in the Western world, seems to be, to me at least, in crisis. It seems to be collapsing under its own weight, really. The bad news about it, the control systems, the rules and regulations that people are expected to abide by, which these days are so outdated, and people are turning more and more to alternative religions, spirituality, and all these kind of things, and as you mentioned earlier, sort of Christian Druidy origins and all sorts of minority religions, for want of a better word. What do you think is the future for large religions like Catholicism? Are they going to see this through, or are they going to just be replaced like a dinosaur?
No, I think the major institutions are all collapsing, and you're undoubtedly going to see reform movements within these churches. There is a move. When I was in Rome 2 years ago, one of the politicians we met with said that there's definitely a move to get rid of Ratzinger and to bring in somebody from the third world who would kind of do reforms to the church, make it more, apparently a little bit more transparent.
Yeah.
But the thing, I often say it's kind of like rearranged in the deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah.
It doesn't really change the fundamental problem with these institutions is that they're big moneyed corporations that aren't accountable to their own members, and they're not practicing their own teaching. So, that recreate on the ground what's lacking in these institutions happens all the time. So I think in the long run, their time is over, and they represent a time in history where the church and the state operated together as an empire to conquer the world, and I think people are realizing it's time for that to end. So, I'm hopeful that a lot of these new movements from below are going to replace it.
Why couldn't we have a church system run somewhat like a corporation but non-profit, where the people who attend are shareholders and they get a vote in who becomes the CEO?
There you go.
Wouldn't that make more sense? If you get a bad guy in charge, you all get to say, actually, we don't like this guy, you're out.
Makes sense to me.
I think personally, from my point of view, we keep talking about the Vatican.
Yeah.
And all of this temple and thrones and money and gold and paintings is what disgusts me.
Yeah.
This is what I'd like to see an end of. There's no need for it.
Well, your chap, Jesus, he was a carpenter, so he would have probably drunk from a wooden cup anyway.
Jesus actually was quite against organised religion, if I've got my Jesus right, have I, Kevin?
Very much. One of his favorite sayings is, the Sabbath was made for man, man wasn't made for the Sabbath. And look what happened to him. And what I find really interesting, there was only 2 recorded cases in the Gospels of when he was ever in a church.
Yeah.
Both times he caused a riot. They tried to lynch him the first time he stood up in Nazareth and declared what his mission was. They tried to kill him. And then, of course, when he threw money changers out of the temple, that led to his crucifixion. So this guy is a rebel who was on the side of the poor. He wasn't, a church person.
Kevin, what people don't realize about Jesus, he was completely anti-establishment.
Yeah.
Kevin, I've got a question for you, which is somewhat irrelevant, but I love asking it.
Go on.
If Jesus was Jewish, how come Judaism isn't the religion for everybody? I have to ask that question. It sounds so obvious.
I don't know, Mark. Kevin will have to ask it. I haven't got the answer for it.
Well, I don't know. It's like when he said the kingdom of heaven is within you, that's not a prescription for religion. That's saying all of us have that. It's democratic spirituality, it's within all of us. So it doesn't even matter what you call him or it. It's what you do with it. Right?
Nicely sidestepped, Kevin. Nicely sidestepped.
I didn't mean to sidestep. I just don't have an answer.
I just love asking that question.
Well, probably something, Kevin. This is not your area of expertise at all, but unfortunately, it's just something that we I don't know if I should even bring it up with you because it is quite off topic. But we've noticed we have a satanic calendar, and it's so strange how many of our Christian holidays coincide with the pagan and satanic and occult holidays.
Uncanny, somebody might say.
Have you noticed that, or is that anything you've ever looked into?
Oh, the best example of that is Christmas.
Christmas, yes. My God.
Yeah, so it was for a solar ritual in Rome.
Yeah.
And it had nothing to do with Jesus. So, as a matter of fact, the early church didn't even celebrate his birth at all. They only had a recognition of Easter.
Yes.
So, yeah. But, I think it's worth a lot more exploring that whole issue. Right?
It is. I've been quite surprised by it. And the whole Easter thing, that's the celebration of Ishtar, of Esther, the sun goddess, or something like that.
Yeah. Valentine's Day is satanic, for God's sake.
Valentine's Day is the worst. It's something about sacrificing babies, I think I read.
Yeah, the shedding of blood and infant sacrifice. Valentine's Day, wow.
Were you aware of that?
We got that one wrong, didn't we?
Yeah.
Well, I knew Easter was a Saxon fertility god. He was a big rabbit.
Yeah.
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 When he moved out, he would cause the blossoms to come out on the tree. So I think that's quite nice, actually.
Okay. Oh God.
I think we're done.
Are we? Wow.
We're all pretty much up to time.
I was just getting on to my favourite subject. Sorry, I'm a bit fascinated with Satanism, Kevin. It's not very healthy, I know, but it's just one of my quirks.
One of his many quirks.
That's the topic for next time, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Lovely.
Please, yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on, Kevin. We've had a brilliant time. It's been very interesting stuff.
And keep us updated on the Facebook page about when you're coming and what the dates are going to be as well.
Yeah.
You're on our Facebook page.
We'll put them on the website.
Yeah.
Kevin, send us any links that you've not already sent us, that you've mentioned. Send us through and we'll put them on your page on the website.
Anything you'd like to promote right now before we wrap up?
Yeah, do.
Well, just to say I look forward to seeing you all when I'm over there. And itccs.org and hiddennolonger.com. Please write to me, too. It's hiddeninhistory1@gmail.com. And just thank you for the time, and, I'll see you soon, hopefully.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. It's been wonderful. It's such a worthy thing to be talking about, and I hope you do come back and we can discuss this a bit more.
For sure, we'll talk again.
Lovely.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you both.
See you later.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you ever so much.
Well, that was Kevin.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
That was good. I enjoyed that.
Very interesting stuff.
Very intelligent man.
Quite a lot of that. It was new to me.
Yeah, I know. I understand that. A lot of it was you'd have to be in the know there, Mark. I know.
Yeah.
And even for me, it was a bit. Some of it, I'm not.
We only really scratched the surface, I think.
You know what kind of a Catholic I am.
A repressed one.
A terrible one.
A terrible one.
I don't know what's going on half the time, but but I think
that's true.
I think actually just talking to Kevin, I'll have to drop this whole Catholic thing. I'm really more of a Jesus. Freak.
Yeah. Jesus freak.
Great stuff.
Fantastic.
Is that us done?
That's probably us. Yeah.
What a nice man.
Yeah.
What a wonderful man.
What a nice chap.
Yeah.
That's it. We're done.
Good information, and he's doing good work.
He is, yeah.
And
good chap.
Support him in every way you can. This is to protect children.
Yeah, lots of them, it seems, as well. Big numbers involved in this whole cover-up. And it's still ongoing, which is crazy to me. I still can't get my head around that.
It's still ongoing. Yeah, that's the important thing.
Absolutely insane.
See you next time.
See you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.
You're listening to Alternative Future Radio, home of the weird, resting place of the paranormal. Will take you to the furthest reaches of the galaxy and beyond. Strange phenomena, aliens, psychics, cryptozoology, conspiracy, holistic health, and UFOs. Alternative Future Radio, where spooky just got weird.
What were they actually doing to these children?
Well, in the case of the Magdalen laundries, it was set up back in the 1800s, not just in Ireland, but in 34 other countries. To give you an example of Ireland, there was a law that if a young girl became pregnant and she wasn't married, she would lose the baby. She'd never see the child. It would be taken from her at the moment of birth. And then she would be incarcerated in these laundries, in many cases for her entire life. And she would be forced to work there. It was an unpaid sweatshop. And they were fed very little. A lot of them died because of disease and hunger, beatings and that kind of thing. If they tried running away, the guardian would pick them up and bring them back. So there was a lot of collusion by the police and the government in keeping these facilities going. The last Magdalen laundry in Ireland didn't close till 1996.
Yeah.
Wow.
Many of these perpetrators are still alive. And unfortunately, you probably know about the Ryan report and all that came out over the last few years. But unfortunately, the Magdalen survivors were not included in any settlement. The government ruled they couldn't, sue the church. So, like in Canada, it was a case of the government colluding with the church to protect what they did and to basically make sure that they weren't held liable for a lot of these crimes.
In Canada, was it Native American children you're talking about there?
In the case of the Indian boarding schools, yes, they were both native and mixed blood, who we call the Métis people. And under a law brought in 1920, every native child had to be incarcerated in these places or the parents would go to jail.
Oh.
Our figures show that over half these children died in the facility. The 50% death rate was common all over the country for many decades. So
well, was that their intention? Why were so many of them dying? Did they want them to die?
Well, yeah, these were set up, the schools were set up right at the time, especially in Western Canada, where they were trying to get a lot of the Indians off the land. They wanted the resources. And it was a way to basically depopulate Western Canada, especially.
Yeah. I mean, they sound more like Dachau than a place you would want to go.
Very much. If people go to a lot of my research is posted online. It's called hiddennolonger.com. And you can see in there these statistics, government documents from their own officials describing how children were deliberately taken who were healthy and put in the same dorms as children who were dying of tuberculosis and then never treated.
Good grief.
Deliberately as a policy over many years. So, it's one of the reasons the death rate is so high.
I'm actually a Catholic, Kevin, but I think, did I read somewhere you started out as a Protestant priest?
That's right. It was the United Church of Canada, the largest Protestant church in Canada.
And I understand that.
But I was thrown out of that church. I was expelled from that church when I began to surface a lot of this stuff.
So they didn't like it either. They were also involved in the Protestant church.
Very much. I mean, a lot of the churches were run by the Catholics, but the Protestants and the Church of England were very heavily involved as well. So this was right across the board,
So we're speaking a lot about the church, but in the UK, you're probably familiar with the Holly Gregg case, which would actually foster homes, social services, the judicial system. Do you have any? Has there been a lot of exposure of social services there in Canada in the same?
As a matter of fact,
yeah, go on.
Yeah, I work with the Holly Gregg campaign actually, and what's significant about that is how it implicates elements of people in the police, the judicial system, social services. We found a similar system operating in Canada, where children are taken from their homes, under often very false pretexts.
A dirty plate or a dirty cup.
Right, exactly, and they're trafficked. It's a system of modern child trafficking, and often the children are put in homes of known child rapists, people with a whole documented history of that. And so it's definitely collusion within the social service system itself. We find this in many countries, so we're talking about really an international system of child trafficking.
Campaigner for children's rights and adults who have been victims of abuse by, I think, the Catholic Church or any church.
Yeah.
Industrial schools.
You had some questions you wanted to ask him about other types of institutions as well, so we'll have to bring that up.
Remind me when he comes on.
I will, because you'll have forgotten. I will. Okay, so hopefully on the line we should have Mr. Kevin Annett. Do we have you there, Kevin? I hope so.
I'm here. Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, Kevin.
The line's not brilliant today, but we'll do what we can.
Okay.
You're a long way away in Canada there, Kevin, so...
And thank you for getting up so early for us.
So,
well, that's right, yeah.
Thanks ever so much. So, hiddenfromhistory.org, I suppose the first thing really is, can you tell us about that, Kevin, and who you represent and what you do?
Well, it's been a campaign for almost 20 years now. It started when I was a clergyman on the West Coast, discovering the enormous death rate in the Indian boarding schools run by both the Catholic and the Protestant churches. And I've been campaigning for many years with the survivors to get some kind of reparations and acknowledgement that these were acts of genocide. This wasn't simply children being raped by their random priests. It was a whole policy of extermination, using the churches to force natives off their land, well, really to do many of the things that the English did in Ireland, dislocation and destruction of the culture. So over the years, that's really blossomed into a much bigger movement, and we're working now with groups, including in Ireland, to hold the Vatican and the various governments responsible for these crimes that really happen all over the world. And as a matter of fact, in Ireland, the best example of that is the Magdalen laundries.
Yes.
Yeah.
we've been working with survivors of those facilities too. We had a very similar series of crimes, an enormous death rate, mass graves that are all over the country. So, it's the same kind of crime.
Yeah. Kevin, it's probably worthwhile explaining to people who are beyond these realms what these institutions were. I mean, I know a little bit about the Magdalene laundries, if I can say it right. What?
You're listening to Alternative Future Radio, home of the weird, resting place of the paranormal. Will take you to the furthest reaches of the galaxy and beyond. Strange phenomena, aliens, psychics, cryptozoology, conspiracy, holistic health, and UFOs. Alternative Future Radio, where spooky just got weird.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Out There Hour with Basil and Mark. It's just fantastic to be here. For you, mostly.
The Out There Hour on Alternative Future Radio. The Out There Hour with Basil and Mark. www.alternativefutureradio.com.
Yay! Yay! Yay indeed.
Nearly forgot.
Lots of yays. Everybody yay. That bloke sounded slightly sort of Canadian, didn't he? That voiceover guy.
You reckon?
Yeah. I'm just doing a link, seriously.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, he did sound a bit Canadian. And
He did.
Which is fortunate, because we'll be all the way to Canada
We will,
today to speak to our special guest.
Welcome to the show, everybody. That's how we usually start.
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. Europe, Africa, and the Middle East.
Yeah. Excellent.
And Canada. We're speaking to our special guest, Kevin Annett, on something called the Canadian Holocaust.
Yeah, his website is hiddenfromhistory.org. It's all very interesting stuff.
Now, we're all very well aware in Europe of the child abuse by the Catholic Church.
Yes, they perpetrated quite a bit.
They haven't been taken to book on it satisfactorily, I don't think.
Has anybody done any hard time?
No, Mark, no, nobody's done any hard time. And repatriations?
Barely.
Joke.
Barely.
Yeah.
Shall we bring him in?
Have we explained who he is and what he is?
Kevin Annett, hiddenfromhistory.org.
Yeah.
He is an activist, campaigner.
He's
That involves more than the churches, definitely.
Yeah, because it would be fair to say now that the church has been it's well exposed. Would you agree? I mean,
some of it has been exposed, but exposure is one thing, and being held accountable is another. In Ireland, like in Canada, the government brought in laws to basically indemnify the church legally so that they could never be held responsible for what they did. So, for example, in Canada, not one person has ever gone to trial for the death of a child in these schools, even though over 50,000 children died. So a similar system in Ireland, there hasn't been. The only place where a member of the church hierarchy has ever faced trial is in the United States. This last month, there's 2 bishops who are facing trial for helping cover up the rape of children. But that's never happened in any other country yet.
Wow.
but if they have indemnity, what can ever be done about them? How will they ever be brought to justice? Or priests who, what often happened here in Ireland, the bishop will get to know about a priest who was, had complaints made about him.
Yeah.
And what would happen with them? They'd be moved to a different parish in a different county.
Yeah, yeah.
So you've got 2 people guilty there. You've got the abuser plus the bishop who moved the priest around. But are you saying then that nothing's ever going to be done about them, Kevin?
Well, no, on the contrary, it would be very easy for the governments to take action against these known child raping priests. They simply have to bring the church under the law of the land and say the church is not a law unto itself. Canon law does not supersede, laws to protect children in any country. As a matter of fact, in Ireland, the TSOC last year did in the Doro get up and say that the Vatican is not a law unto itself. It cannot interfere with the laws of Ireland. And in fact, there's a law Now, I'm not sure whether it's passed yet in Ireland, but it provides for priests to be prosecuted and go to jail for 5 years if they don't report the rape of a child. And that's an encouraging step.
Kevin, I've got a question. Was this